Welcome to the Diverse Minds podcast, where we give you the tips, tools, and techniques you need to be a mentally healthy and inclusive leader. Each week, you'll hear about a variety of topics linked to mental health, well-being, and diversity that will enhance both your professional practice and personal well-being. Welcome to the 109th episode of the award-winning Diverse Minds podcast. And on today's episode, I'm going to be talking about creating an inclusive culture for meetings. Because it's National Inclusion Week from the 27th of September to the 3rd of October 2021, and this week's theme is United for Inclusion. And building on the theme of culture, for the month I want to make things practical, and I wanted to talk about inclusive meeting culture, especially with hybrid working, certain people going back to the office, certain people feeling that they still want to stay at home. Now, many of you might have heard, if you ever attended training with me, when we talk about equality, diversity, and inclusion and how it can be defined. And I extrapolate from a definition in Inclusive Leadership, the book written by Claire Sweeney and Fleur Bothwick. So I have added some bits to this. So equality is not just being invited to the meeting, but it's being invited to the meeting in an accessible format. Diversity is having a seat at this important meeting and seeing people from different backgrounds, different levels in the organization, different perspectives. And inclusion is about sharing your views uninterrupted, being heard, and those ideas being acted upon. And of course, we know meetings are important places where a lot of business gets done. People can feel included, marginalized, things can move forward, people get opportunities to be seen, or people can feel invisible. So I thought this was a really important part of inclusive culture, and that's why I wanted to bring it to the fore today. So to start with, think about your organization and think about the meetings that you attend at the moment and how representative, reflective, and diverse are the meetings at the moment. What is the equality of opportunity to speak, attend, and take part? And how inclusive do you think these meetings are in terms of how people can access the space virtually or face-to-face? How people can contribute and their ideas being acted upon? So that's the first thing I would say to reflect on. And then some practical points in relation to your meetings. This could be team meetings or other meetings that you attend. What time and day is the meeting held? Is it always on the same time, at the same day? Do you have quick fire meetings in the morning, particularly when we were all in lockdown? Were those useful? Who sends out the agenda and minutes? Indeed, do you have agenda and minutes? How is the agenda set and decided upon? Is it planned in advance? Is it the manager that takes the lead? Is it quite ad hoc? Do you just pop things in a chat? Is the same person always the chair? If so, why? And who speaks the most at these meetings? And of course, this might have changed in a face-to-face environment to a virtual environment to a hybrid environment. So have a think about all of those things. And then what about the other elements of inclusive meetings? So thinking about hybrid meetings, they do need a lot of work. And in fact, there's been a lot of discussion about, can they really truly work? And maybe some of you have been having hybrid meetings for a while, particularly if you work in global corporations where there are time differences. So people have to dial in, of course, and distance and everything else. So are video conference links included as standard? Do people have the option to dial in and not be online if they don't want to be or they can't? Would someone have to request a link or a dial-in code? Because again, this is all about accessibility for various different reasons. Usually meetings are recorded now. It's become pretty standard compared to when I started talking about this in 2018. But for anyone who can't attend, is there also an audio option that they could listen rather than watch because of all the screen time? What's the meeting room actually like? So has it been tested for audio quality for people dialing in and also audio quality for people in the space? So if anyone has a hearing impairment and lip reads, would they be able to see everyone? Is the T-loop function in the room workable? Does it work with someone's hearing aid? Because often T-loops can lag behind. So can everyone see and hear each other easily? And anyone joining either on a phone call or video, how does that work with audio? And do people know that they're there as well? Could a team member easily suggest an agenda item for consideration at this meeting? Is that clear? Is there a convoluted process? Is it always someone senior that takes a lead on this? And who takes the minutes of the meeting? Often, I've had so many stories of very senior women being given a pad and a pen to write minutes when that absolutely isn't their role. They're not there to do that. So who takes the minutes? Does it rotate? Brilliant if it does. Is it a case of you just download the chat if it's an online meeting and that serves as the minutes of your meeting, which is, I think, really helpful. One of the really useful things about video calls. And do you ever have a mix of speakers if it's that kind of meeting? Let's say it's a committee meeting where you might learn from different people, or any kind of meeting where maybe externals could attend, or even internal people. Are there a mix of guest speakers invited to share ideas from others? So you're also getting a perspective from other organizations. And these might seem very, very obvious, but you would be amazed at the number of times that people struggle. In fact, I was conducting a training session the other day and I wasn't told that someone had a hearing impairment, and so I couldn't set up my closed captions. So things like this. Also, are you telling external speakers if anyone does have any access requirements and what they need to make their presentation or their talk as accessible as possible? And then thinking further about accessibility, and I mentioned, does your meeting have agendas and notes? Sending notes and meeting information in advance to all team members is super useful. Now, I do know that not everyone reads it, but particularly for people who may find this really useful. Maybe there's memory loss, thinking about long COVID, also dyslexic members of staff, this could be incredibly useful for them. People that maybe have hearing impairments, that might not have been able to hear everything. So this is really, really a good practice for everyone. People who might have to leave the meeting early for caring responsibilities. And also when these meeting notes are typed up, making sure that the fonts are accessible, making sure that the format, ideally a Word document, can be read on a screen reader for people who maybe use screen readers. Printing on cream or off-white paper really does reduce glare for all, and it's particularly good practice for anyone who has dyslexia or potentially other is on the neurodivergent spectrum. And at meetings, you could also have coloured overlays available for people to use. And these are really great. They're very cheap. You might have seen people at school using them. So those coloured overlays, they're so, so useful. So do you have those available? People can just grab them. Maybe they're by the door or somewhere easy and just use them. And then it's no big deals made of it. Often people will have their own coloured overlays. I understand that. And if people are dialing in virtually, they might have tinted their own screen on their computer. But again, why not share that for everyone to know? Because I think the white glare can be exhausting for all of us. Making sure that minutes are clear and succinct, oh my goodness, and in plain English. Particularly in higher education sector, minutes can be very flowery and very convoluted. And in fact, you can just have an action plan or an action tracker. That can be a really useful way of doing things. And yeah, I mentioned about T-loops, layout of room, enabling recording of the meeting, of a workplace adjustment. Of course, now what's great, you can password protect those. So there really shouldn't be the issues that there were before around, we don't know where this is going to go and what's going to happen. And of course, if someone's in the room and they need to record it on a dictaphone or their own device, a LiveScribe pen, and it's for their personal adjustment, this should absolutely happen. And I think there's an understanding that they shouldn't and they wouldn't send it out more widely at the end of the day. And that's completely understandable. Then the other area is timing. So consider the impact on carers, anyone with any kind of caring responsibilities. I know lots of workplaces have core meeting hours of between 10 and 4, so people can go and do the school drop-off or potentially the school pickup. It might even be that your core hours are between 10 and 3, and how people can participate in that. Potentially as well, now that we've got continuing to use the online function, but it could be that you also have different locations, so you want to consider where meetings could happen, so it's not always the same people traveling. If meetings run on, which often happens, we know this, don't we? Assign a rotating timekeeper. So someone to say, we've got 10 minutes left. What do we want to focus on? It can be really useful as well to assign minutes, a minute allocation to an agenda item if there are people that drone on. And also make sure that comfort breaks are built into longer meetings, particularly online. Good practice is 10-minute break for every hour on screen. Can be slightly different face-to-face, whatever works for you, but people can then get up and get tea and go to the bathroom and have a comfort break. But I think this is often overlooked because it can be really, really exhausting. It's also important to think about how people are going back to the workplace, and maybe we haven't attended a face-to-face meeting for a long time, so it can feel overwhelming and daunting. So why not check in with your team members and see how they're feeling about that? So I really hope you're enjoying the content, and don't forget, you can sign up to my bi-monthly newsletter. You'll receive the ebook, The Mentally Healthy Leading Manager. Don't forget, the link is in the show notes, and it's bit.ly/MHLMEBKLNK. So do check that out. So another element to consider, so we've talked about accessibility, timings, is inclusive communication. And this is broad and there's a lot to it. But I think we've been having lots of conversations recently about pronouns and checking the pronouns that team members use and just having them there either on a badge, in your email signature. This could be for a variety of reasons. This could be to do with how people identify. This could also be to do with names that we're more or less used to and people not knowing the gender of the person. Not assuming sexual orientation. So someone says, oh, did you have a good weekend before a meeting? Someone says, oh yeah, my partner and I did this. Oh, right. So what did you and he do? Or, assuming if I'm a woman that my partner would be male. And I've had a really cringy, awful example of this actually in many meetings where someone identified as lesbian and a senior police officer assumed that her partner was a man, even though she was part of the LGBT network and had this lanyard on and had talked about this previously. So it does happen. So it's to remember about that gender neutral language. Maximize active listening, and don't forget to check out Listening to Support Someone with lots of active listening tips, that podcast episode. Why not get more introvert team members to chair the meeting? So you get a different flavor, a different way of doing things. Now, you have to be careful because it's not about throwing someone into the lion's den and saying, right, great, 5 minutes time, you're going to chair the meeting, particularly if someone has a preference for planning and getting all their ducks in a row. That's actually going to be really difficult for them. But introducing this idea of rotating chair and talking to team members or people in a particular committee or group and saying, okay, so who'd like to go next? It'd be really great if we can go around everyone in the meeting, and some people are going to take turns chairing. And of course, before that, we'll have a catch up. You'll get support with the agenda and anything you might find tricky and what you might want backup with. Get something super simple as well is asking the quieter members what they think. So, okay, we haven't heard from you, not to point fingers and, at school, I know people used to hate this when they were caught off guard, but also saying if you at the beginning of a meeting, if someone is quite quiet, it'd be really good to hear from them. So we'll be encouraging maybe members that we don't usually hear from publicly to give their opinion, because I think it will be great in terms of hearing all the voices in the space. And you might like to create a team charter if it's a team meeting, or a kind of meeting charter around how you want to make it as inclusive as possible and get everyone's ideas in, because then they feel bought into it. And then, of course, there's gender biases or biases around different protected characteristics. But we know there's a lot of research done on women and gender perceptions in meetings. So be very aware of this as the chair and be clear. And this goes back to the idea about a charter, airtime rules. So let's say we're going to share the air. We're going to make sure that everyone has a chance to speak openly in this meeting. And we're really going to minimize domination of one voice as per our meeting outlines. In a research report by Brigham Young University in Princeton in 2012, they should show that women speak around 25% of the time during professional meetings. And if women speak more than 30%, men in the space tend to think, they're monopolizing and they're talking too much. So being really, really aware of this. If someone is monopolizing a space, it's to speak to them privately and individually, draw them back to the ground rules of your meeting or your charter and say, you know what, it's really great or really passionate, but it's vital that we hear from other people in the meeting, particularly I noticed X group, or if it's a particular level, job role, gender, etc. And ensure follow-up and follow-on actions are spread out between people. I think with action trackers, we can often see that people are given the lion's share of the work. Now, this might not always be possible. If it's a facilities meeting and there's one health and safety rep there, and of course, health and safety has been really stretched, that is going to be tricky, but where possible, and can other people help out there? And really simple things like making sure there are enough chairs, making sure there's enough bandwidth, making sure that the AV and tech has been tested, particularly if you're using things like closed captions, people are dialing in, there's no feedback, it can just help. And doing a bit of troubleshooting and making sure that happens. And I'm not saying that that's a particular gender issue, but there can also be gender bias in terms of who's more savvy with using technology than not. And of course, it's just people that feel more comfortable with technology and people that feel less comfortable with technology. It's not necessarily rooted in gender. So I think by having a test for everyone, that can be really useful. And then obtaining feedback, so making it work for everyone. So I have used as a really great resource, Think Growth, and Katie Burke shared an example of asking for feedback around inclusive meetings and any changes that you make. And the way in which she words this, I think, is super helpful. So after your meeting, you could email something like, today you may or may not have noticed, but I tried out something to make our team meetings a bit more inclusive for everyone. If you have feedback on how it went or something else we should try to make our meeting more inclusive, please submit it here. You could have a link to a survey, or you could just say, email me. All responses are anonymous, or please feel free to email me directly. And I thought this was a really succinct way. So everyone's thinking about it. It's on everyone's radar. The chair is, of course, taking the lead and steering that, but everyone has a part to play in this. So I really hope you've enjoyed this episode. We've touched on the parallels with equality, diversity and inclusion in meetings, why it's important, why it adds value. We've looked at some practical examples of creating an inclusive meeting culture, why it's important to create those inclusive meeting spaces and how it increases productivity. And I would suggest that you also think about how you might do this, what might be practicable. And I've included a link in the show notes to hybrid working and how to create more positive hybrid working and what you might need to do. So I really hope that's been useful to you and look forward to seeing you in the next episode. And if you've enjoyed this episode, please leave me a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcast from, and you can leave a review because that really helps. And of course, next week is the start of Black History Month, where we've got lots of goodies and exciting content for you. So until then, take care.
Thanks for listening to the Diverse Minds podcast. Don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you access your podcasts from. You can also connect with me on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Tune into next week's episode of the podcast, where I'll bring you more insights on mental health and inclusion. Bye for now.